So thank you everybody for being here for the Protection Insurance for Expats training webinar. I'm Catherine Knowles. I'm an expert in protection insurance in the personal, business and group space in the UK and internationally. And I have Lee Robertson here with me today, who is the founder of OctoMembers, who are doing the CPD sponsoring for this, which is absolutely phenomenal. So thank you very much, Lee.
Pleasure. Great to be here.
So lovely to have you here. And what's going to happen as well is that Lee is going to be the one keeping me on track, because if anybody has ever attended any kind of training with me, you will know that I am a talker. I will absolutely keep going for the full 45 minutes. So Lee will be keeping an eye on the chat function. Please do send any questions in that you have in there. Ask questions throughout. We can ask questions at the end. The other thing I'm just going to very, very quickly do for you all is put into the chat function the link to the CPD form. Really simple form, so that should be there for you all to see. Really simple in the sense of you just put your name in, your address, email address, and that you've listened to this, and there you go, and the CPD certificate will come straight to your inbox. So today we're going to be doing a say all about insurance for expats, what that means. There will be some quite technical information. There will also be some general aspects as to what we would be expecting, how we would go about that process. So, Lee, I think you're starting me off with where you think we should start the conversation, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Catherine. I'm really looking forward to this. For those that don't know, I'm a kind of recovering IFA, if that makes sense. I was an IFA for 30 years, but sold my practice about 5 years ago to set up OctoMembers Group. But I've always had this passion for protection, and you will see me regularly speaking on the circuit about protection, which is why we're so keen to support Catherine with CPD and the Practical Protection podcast.
Bye.
Hi there. For anybody who's just come in, if you can make show you on mute, if that's okay, please.
Yeah, that would be great. So listen, Catherine, today we're going to be talking about protection for expats, which a really special subject. I know that's something that you guys are renowned for, about getting difficult and complex cases through.
Yeah.
So why don't you just give an overview of where we're going to go today with that?
Absolutely. So there's going to be quite a few things we're going to be going through. We're going to be going through the way that UK insurers and international insurers differ in the sense of how you would go about applying for the insurance. Also going to be looking a little bit as to what we need to do to make sure that we're comfortable from a compliance point of view, what our permissions might be, how that might differ between different people, how it can work as well in terms of like the different types of options you will have, because sometimes it's a slightly different eligibility criteria at times, sometimes for when you're doing it internationally, how it would work in terms of being able to use a UK insurer for someone who's non-UK resident, and just a real mix, really, hopefully that's useful for everybody. So I can always start it off with how they differ if we think that's a good way, I think, to start. So when we're looking at things and we're looking at UK versus international insurers, there are some really big differences. So anybody who's familiar with the UK market in terms of life insurance, critical illness cover, income protection, you'll know that what we do is we get a client, we do research, we find the right insurer, we put an application forward, fingers crossed it's accepted from application, but there sometimes might be some medicals that might be needed, or other extra underwriting, in a sense, GP reports, things like that. Now, with international insurers, it's very different in the sense of we do those things, we do the research, we find the options, we're going to do the application, but the medical is going to have to happen straight away, and it has to be done. It's not it might be happening, it won't be happening, it will need to be done. And also the person needs to pay for it themselves. So in the UK, if there is a GP report, if there's a medical, it would be the insurer that would turn around and say, right, well, we'll pay for this report and we'll do it at a time and place that suits you. That's generally the way it works. Now, in international, they will say, you're going to need to have a medical and you're going to pay for it at a GP that's approved, and that we're comfortable to say is definitely a GP. It's just usually that person's GP, which is fine. They will set what's required in the medical. So it's best not to sort of say to somebody, oh, you're going to need a medical, and then they suddenly come back with one that they've paid for, which doesn't actually have all the information in that's needed. So the insurer is going to be saying to us, right, this is what we're going to need. The person will need to pay for it. And then they can potentially get a refund of that. So whilst they're possibly thinking, oh, that sounds a bit naff, let's say, they will get a refund on the sense of, sorry, I'm also just keeping an eye on anybody who's coming in, so forgive me if I suddenly my eyes dart in different places. So if the international insurer offers terms, then and the person takes the policy, then they will fund the premium. If the person is rated and they don't take the policy out, then they will refund the premium. But if they are offered the policy and they've been given standard terms and they've changed their mind, they won't get that medical refunded. To get the refund, we do need to do things like submitting evidence, submitting bills and things like that, and then that will be refunded directly to the person. There's a couple of things though in terms of eligibility that's quite interesting when we're going to the international market as well. So very different to the UK and a lot of places in the EU. With the international insurers, they can still gender price. So we just need to be conscious of the fact that people can be priced differently, obviously depending upon their gender. The other thing that's really interesting and kind of doesn't necessarily sit completely okay with me. I understand the theory behind it, but it's just one of those ones where I feel a little bit, some international insurers, we can find that a person's academic qualifications will alter the terms that they are offered. So the higher the academic qualification, the better the terms will be. Now, it's a lot to do with socio-demographics, statistics. As I say, it's one that one for me feels a little bit unusual, but it's important to be aware of it. You know, it might be something that you need to ask your client. It's something that we wouldn't usually be asking when we're applying for protection insurances. So in terms of if you're speaking to a client in sort of wondering whether or not that we're going to need to go to international insurers, because it's quite different as well, because there's international insurance policies that can be done by UK insurers, and then there's international insurers. So the time that we might be needing to go to the international insurers is if somebody doesn't have a GP record of 2 years. They usually want to see that. And if they're not UK residents, so that is quite a big thing, obviously, that they want to know that somebody's UK resident. But again, residency, it kind of blurs as we go along. So that could be quite interesting as well, because residency for some insurers is based upon where they travel and how often out of the country, but where they consider their main residence to be the UK, even if they're only here for a few months a year, they might be seen as UK resident. You can sometimes find that with people who are often working in the Middle East, but have got like real bases here, their homes are here. And that they then want to still have the insurance still based in the UK, even though they spend a lot of the time outside the UK. Or it could be this, say, they consider the residency based upon the fact of where they actually live. There's a couple of things to really be mindful of when you are looking at international insurers too. And Lee, if you need to stop and give me a chance to have a breath or anything, just to grab me at some point, okay?
I'm fascinated. Keep going.
Okay, then. When you're going to international insurers, you do need to be very mindful. Make sure your documents and everything are altered to what you would usually do in terms of your compliance reports, because they will not have the FSCS protection there. So that's the Financial Services Compensation Scheme that comes with UK insurers. That essentially means that if a UK insurer goes bust, regulators will step in. They'll make sure that the insurance policies are honoured. You don't have that with the international cover. So it is just an extra thing to be very, very mindful of. And you can also sometimes find that with some international insurers that there are specific rules in the way that they set up their policies. Some of them won't allow decreasing term insurance. Some, it has to be certain multiples in terms of the term. So you can do 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, things like that. And you just need to be really, really mindful of that. Quite an interesting dynamic that can happen as well is that with international insurers, they usually are backed directly by the reinsurers. So I'm sure a lot of people here will know this, but just in case, especially for anybody new to the industry. So we see the insurers, so you see your usual names, your Avivas, your L&Gs, your LVs, Royal London, Zurich. You see all of these at this level. Zurich's an exception, so I actually shouldn't probably have said Zurich because Zurich reinsure themselves. But most of the insurers are kind of like sit here, and they're the names that we usually know and most clients would recognize. And then above them is the reinsurers, or behind them, maybe I should say that. I don't want to say any insurers by saying them above them. Anyway, so possibly behind them, and they're backing them. So these insurers here will take on a certain amount of the risk that they write, and the reinsurers go, well, you're taking on that, and we'll say that we'll insure a certain percentage of what you're writing. And what you can find, which can be quite interesting, is obviously each insurer has their maximum that they would insure a person for, and that also sits with the reinsurers. So what can be really interesting is that you might have somebody who's needing insurance. They might already have insurance in the UK, but they need some extra, something like that. And you're going to go and speak to an international insurer. And it's quite important to know who's the reinsurer sat behind them, because you might be trying to go all this way through, trying to get all this stuff done. And then all of a sudden it comes out that actually that person's at their maximum that they can be with that reinsurer through the UK insurer that they've used already. So there's quite a lot of different dynamics that we need to be seeing there. In terms of the options that we have, so in the UK, with UK insurers, AIG is probably the insurer that works the most in this space. So what they do is they do have a specific international policy that they can do, even though they're a UK insurer. And that is to do with different treaties that have been set up, different agreements with reinsurers, and what isn't allowed. Because most insurers in the UK will have treaties with their reinsurers that say UK citizens. Whereas AIG have been able to sort of like access and gain the bit more of the international market based upon insuring somebody based upon where they live. Okay, you also have Guardian and Aviva that have dabbled a bit in this area, but so they do that as well. And as I say, some of them is more based upon the rules of eligibility are how much they're in the UK, how much they're outside the UK, where they class their main residence, and things like that. It's really dependent upon the reinsurer agreement. But the main time we're going to be, what happens if AIG goes, that's very interesting, and that would be one that I will certainly be looking at as well. Just seeing a question come in, you know, what happens if AIG goes? Really, really unsure at the moment. It's very open in the public, and there was a lot of discussion about AIG potentially being absorbed into Aviva. So as I say, AIG, Aviva, Guardian do work in this space. AIG and Aviva do have different approaches as to the way that they do the insurance. So Aviva is a UK policy, Guardian is a UK policy, AIG is an international policy, but by a UK insurer. So at the moment, it's really, really unsure as to what would happen. But essentially, if you found that you couldn't get it away from AIG, then you will need to go into the international market. And there are certain things that we would need to just be looking at for that. So in terms of what we're doing, why we're going to be going international. So the main times that we're going to be going international is if somebody, as I say, doesn't have those GP records. It's all about, in any of these, it's all about what's the liability in the UK. And that's not just from what the insurer can do, that's also what your compliance will allow you. And also, really big one here, your professional indemnity insurance will allow you to do. So in my firm, one of the things that we did is that we went obviously really intensely into figuring out what we could and couldn't do in different areas. We had to make sure, was our professional indemnity insurance happy with us insuring people if they're in this country, if they're in that country, with what that regulator says. And sometimes it will change the way that your PI insurance works. But you do really need to keep an eye on that, because you don't want to be in a position where obviously things don't go as you would be expecting. But usually there does need to be a UK liability to qualify with the insurer, and also for your own compliance as well. So UK liabilities, a mortgage, very, very simple, just as we would expect. Oh, I think we've possibly got somebody unmuted. If you wouldn't, I've just spotted somebody, so I'll just quickly muted you. Very, very standard with the UK liabilities. There's also things like dependent children. So you might have somebody who has children at boarding school, at private school. It might be that somebody has been in a family and the family's split up and one of them has now moved to abroad, and then there's children here that they still need to provide support for if anything was to happen to them. You know, again, going into the realms of, in that sense, kind of insurance that kind of will fulfill maintenance payments in a sense for some time. You know, we potentially might be able to look at care home fees. You know, if you are somebody who is living abroad but having to pay significant fees towards looking after a parent in the UK who is in need of a care home, inheritance tax planning, gift planning, all of these things will come into it. We also have as well business liability. So that could be that in either the personal space, sorry, not the business, no, not the personal space, in the business space or the group space, you might have somebody who is in a contract with a UK company, but is living abroad, and that can sometimes come into it when we're also looking at these insurances as to what can and can't be allowed. But each one of them is individual, and you do need to really keep an eye, speak to underwriters to sort of say, is this going to be possible? And I think a really key thing as well when we're looking at international is just be very mindful that insurers are constantly watching for any kind of unrest in any country. So anything that suddenly happens can really, really change the outcomes for your clients as you're going along.
Catherine,
Yeah,
just sorry to butt in there.
that gives me chance for water.
Yeah, I thought that might be opportune. Ellis had her hand up, but you were talking. Ellis, have you still got a question? Ellis Floyd.
No, didn't realise I'd put my hand up. I do
Oh,
apologise.
it went up and down. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. It gives
Thank you, though.
Catherine a break anyway. Okay.
You. That's probably just Alice. I know Alice. You're probably just thinking, oh, just give Catherine a chance to breathe. She's just going and going and going. That is what I do. So, so there's lots and lots of reasons that we might be wanting to do this, but ultimately there are certain compliance considerations that we want to do as well. So for myself and what I would be doing with me and my team, and when I'm speaking to people, is very much a case of why do they want the cover? As always, why would somebody wanting this insurance? Or why do I feel that they might need that insurance? Is there a specific reason? There needs to be a specific reason. And again, I say AIG is one that's working quite a lot in this space. If you do a search on Google for AIG overseas tool even, then what it will do is you'll usually then download a spreadsheet that they have, which has got lots of their rules kind of engineered into it. And I'll give you examples of what they can and can't do in terms of different products for somebody in that situation that you're looking at. But as well as looking at, sorry, why we're doing this, and things like that, the other thing is somebody who's not living in the UK, why aren't they doing it in the country that they live in? And that's a really important one to consider as well, because for a number of different factors. So, and there can be very, very obvious reasons for this as well. And I've certainly helped people in this situation. So in the case of, well, why aren't you doing it now that you live in Germany? Why aren't you doing insurance in Germany? And with some people, it is just simply a case of saying, along the lines of, they're very confident in speaking German in this situation. They're very happy where they are. They don't plan on coming back to the UK in a sense. But they know that insurance is so technically worded that they just really, really want something in their native tongue to be able to understand. And that sometimes can be reason, because if not, could they be reading something in a different language which doesn't really sort of really makes sense to them, or some kind of, it's jargon enough when we know the language ourselves. And even when we work in this industry, when you don't work in protection insurance, if I suddenly look at something in private medical or travel insurance versus the other way around, you can get really stuck in it anyway. So you can understand that. It might be that the person says, I do live here, but I don't trust the way that the insurance market works here because of the claims results and things like that. Ultimately, it will come down to what you feel comfortable with and what your compliance says that you can and can't do. Really key things are, how long are they going to be outside of the UK for? So the longer that somebody's outside of the UK for or planning to be, the trickier it can be to get insurance, the more limited it can be in the product types. So life insurance in itself, probably not going to have too much of an issue in the sense of using a UK insurer. The critical illness cover starts to become trickier the longer that somebody is outside of the UK. And the reason for that, it comes down to once somebody's lived outside the UK for so long, the insurer starts to analyse them based upon the statistics for that country, as if they were living there, obviously, forever. And the morbidity, so the death statistics, and morbidity is the health statistics, get that right, and the mortality is the death statistics, really do change country to country. And it's not just a case of looking at, well, what's the life expectancy? It's also things like looking at, especially taking critical illness cover into account, the healthcare systems in other countries. And granted, there's probably other countries that at the moment are doing far better than the UK, but there are those considerations as well. So it's very, very complex when an insurer is looking at it. What we would say as well, when I was talking about like the professional indemnity side of things, as an example, we are able in my company to advise people who live in Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man. That's not necessarily available to everybody, and we sought ourselves permissions directly from their regulators to make sure that it satisfied our professional indemnity insurance. So even though we could have just gone ahead in a sense with the insurers to do it, we made sure that we had that permission ourselves. And just to sort of make you aware as to what can happen is, so we have permission, but we're also not allowed to go and solicit business there. So if somebody comes to us and finds us that, you know, to basically do business with them, that's fine, and to insure them if they live there. But you can't just start promoting yourself in that country because of the way that their rules work. And so AIG, Royal London, Aviva can all work in those areas that I just mentioned there. So that's Jersey, Guernsey and Isle of Man. But make sure your compliance and your PI are comfortable with what you're doing. The other thing as well is sometimes there used to be things called passporting, as to where you have permissions to do insurance in different countries. That's gone since Brexit, so we don't need to worry about that. But in any case, because of the way that the insurers work, you're either going to be doing probably the AIG international policy, maybe floating over to what Aviva can potentially allow sometimes, or you will be going international where those passporting requirements aren't needed anyway because of the specific route that you're doing. So why is it so complicated? As I said, it's so complicated because the reinsurers have got all these different statistics and there's all these different treaties. So international insurers will have the specific international treaties with the reinsurers directly with them. The UK insurers like AIG will have specific UK treaties, but signing international treaties with some reinsurers, which means that what we can do in the UK market for people who are non-UK resident is more restricted than if we do go internationally. So it kind of becomes a little bit of a bit of a toss-up as to what's better in some ways, because is it better to do a UK policy that's maybe a bit more restricted in what we can do, but you do have the FSCS protections, and you know that there's a lot of security there, or do you go internationally where there is sometimes more options in terms of what you can do in terms of critical illness cover, how long you can have that for, but you don't have the FSCS protections, but you will still have the policies backed by the biggest reinsurers in the world. Moving abroad is probably quite a good one to look at as well. So moving abroad, when you have UK policies, it depends upon the policy. It does depend upon the insurer as well. And people might be wondering what happens when you're applying for cover if you're going to be moving abroad. That's something where in the application you just need to be really forward with the insurer. But there's also sometimes limits, and it's quite hard to understand what to put forward with different clients depending upon different situations. So you might have somebody, I know somebody works with me, and you know, she'll say, oh, I'd love to go and move to Australia one day. And, you know, that's absolutely a lovely idea. Obviously, that lovely, lovely warm weather and everything like that. But it's a dream. It's not happening. She's not looked for work, as far as I know. She's not been looking at houses. She's not got interviews in place, things like that. So it is just well, I'm thinking of doing it at some point. To me, that's not a I'm moving to Australia kind of situation. If somebody has had those job interviews, if they have been looking at the market, then that's when we're going to need to say to the insurers, this person might be moving at some stage, or they might definitely be moving, which at this point, we're probably going to need to move more towards that international market side of things and where they're available. But when you do move abroad, when you've got a UK insurance policy, For life insurance and critical illness cover, it shouldn't really be an issue. On the basis that the insurers, as long as you will keep paying from a UK bank account, the insurers are pretty much okay. The complication can come from claims. So with certain countries, the insurers would want you, if you were diagnosed with, say, a critical illness in certain countries, they would actually want you to go to one of the approved countries that they approve, essentially, to make sure that you are being diagnosed correctly and that it is being done efficiently. Because going back to that whole thing of the compliance, why are they wanting a UK insurance? Or for this, the claim, what does the claim come through? It's also quite a lot in terms of money laundering and trying to make sure there's no financial crime happening in the background. So we just have to be a bit more diligent, even more so than usual, when it comes to the international side of things, very much depending upon the country as well as to where somebody is living. Income protection is a really interesting one, because income protection, it can be done. You can have international income protection policies, but they are that's certainly not my, in a sense, area of specialism, because they are very specific as to who can and can't offer these kinds of policies. It's really quite held in sort of like small groups in a sense. And there are specific limitations. When I was doing some research on it at one point, I was going to try and get a client to speak to somebody in that space. They happen to be living in Africa, and for one of the insurers, the rule was we will not provide income protection for people living in Africa. Didn't get any basis for it or anything, but you can sometimes come across those kinds of barriers. And if somebody does have a UK income protection policy and moves abroad, it's quite likely that the insurer will want that policy to be cancelled, even if you were keeping paying it out of a UK bank account. It just becomes a bit different, because it's all to do with the UK tax side of things, which really helps obviously towards the residency, but it's all to do with how they assess the claim, those percentages, the gross pay versus the net pay, things like that, when they are assessing a claim, which can become very, very complicated. There is a little bit of an exception to this, though, and it's a bit too technical to go into in this webinar, but we do quite a lot of work with offshore workers, and you will find with some offshore workers that they're not really sat within the UK tax system, even though they kind of are. They've got certain permissions and benefits. So even though they're not kind of UK tax resident, they are still allowed the policies at times. But again, you just need to be really specific as to the insurers that you are looking at. I'm just making sure I quickly look through my notes and go through everything that I've said. Oh, North America is a really good one as well. So lots of people want to know, can we insure people in North America? It's kind of a yes and no situation, which is incredibly unhelpful. I do appreciate that. Reason being is, again, going back to the treaties, there are certain treaties in place which basically say you shouldn't really have a UK insurance policy if you're US residents, and vice versa. It's all to do with the way that the money would be moving over financial institutions and things like that, and certain policies and political aspects of things that are very, very intense. But you can insure people if they are living in North America. It's very likely that you would need a solicitor. It's not an area that I'm an expert in, so if anybody is asking questions about that, I will just go blank, but I will find the information out for you and come back to you if you do have any questions about that I can't answer right here. But you can do, but it is complicated, and so you do usually need to have some legal support when you are doing that. You can also find that as well, just in general with UK policies, when you are putting them into trust. If somebody is a beneficiary or a trustee and they're in America, you will often find that the insurers really suggest and strongly recommend that you don't do that. They would usually recommend it should be somebody within the UK. Again, that comes down to just being very, very clear to clients of the fact that if you have, in a sense, £100,000 payout on an insurance policy in the UK, but it's in trust to someone in a different country, they might not necessarily see the full 100,000 once it's gone over to them due to the rules of moving money across the international lines. And the other thing, though, it's very interesting with North America, because we did have this last year, is that diplomats are different. So diplomats have a UK address. And so even though they are living, this person that we were spotting, they were living in America, they had a UK address, because that's the way that it works when you're a diplomat. So they could actually be insured with a UK policy, just quite normally with a UK insurer because of that. So do keep an eye out for anything that seems a little bit different as well. You know, sort of, you know, don't just automatically go to, oh, no, we certainly can't do that. Sometimes we can have quite unusual situations as well. And probably the last thing, because obviously we've got about 15 minutes left, is for me to just have a quick chat about some case studies, and then anybody can ask any questions if they want to. So in terms of case studies, so I thought it'd be more useful to have some case studies of international insurers and what they are able to offer. So I have two for you. So I have a life and critical illness policy that I was arranging for some people. I'm just going to talk about one of the lives that I was supporting at this time, because it was a married couple, but they were in their mid-40s. They were based in Europe, and they were non-smokers. So that all still comes into play with things, if whether or not they're smokers or not. And I say gender will come into this as well. So for this person, it was the male life who was more expensive because of the way that the pricing was done. The female life was about £30 a month cheaper, actually. So for this person, based upon their needs, I'd done life insurance of £400,000 and £200,000 of critical illness cover in the international market over 15 years. Now, the premium for that was about £180 per month. So that gives you an example of that. The next one, because what we can find as well, especially when we're going into the international space, is that it can be very high net worth individuals. And we need to be very conscious of that. And we might as well, it might be that, as I say, I've obviously very clear, I'm protection insurance. I know about inheritance tax, I know about gift planning, I know how to support people in the insurances, but I'm not allowed to provide advice in terms of IHT planning or gift planning, the actual IFA side of things and stuff like that. So with this one, it was very much a case of I was working with an IFA, I was working with a solicitor as well, because there was so much going on with this one. So essentially, the next person that I'd supported was somebody in their early 50s living in Europe. So the last people were living in Europe and UK citizens. And with this person, they were living in Europe and not a UK citizen. So that's one of the ones where, from our compliance point of view, we really had to sort of like make ourselves confident as to why are we doing this insurance for this person? You know, what is the link to the UK? And for this person, there was a significant inheritance tax liability that was potentially due in the next 5 years if they were to die. So that's why for us, with our compliance, we were able to do it, because whilst they didn't kind of fulfill the real sort of like UK citizenship of some sort of level of some sort, they did have a liability here, which is why we were able to do it. And now this person was a smoker, so as most of you will know, that automatically made the premiums significantly higher than if they hadn't been. So with this person, in terms of the gifting, sorry, not the gifting, in terms of the inheritance tax, we had 2.5 million that was potentially due in inheritance tax within the next 5 years if they passed away. And the premium for that was £1,060 a month with an international insurer. So not cheap. They were a smoker. They're obviously in their 50s, they're taking out a significant sum of money as well. But it meant, you know, we could do it because of the fact that there was a liability here. So whenever you're doing the expat cover, if it's somebody who's here and going abroad, generally not going to be an issue, but keep an eye on their income protection side of things. But if somebody who's living abroad, it's just really going back to the, why do they need it? Is there a UK liability here? Even stuff like with the liabilities, and I mentioned before, like dependent children, you can even sometimes factor in projections for university fees at times. But again, you just need to be really on top of it, speaking with the underwriters at the insurers to make sure that they're confident with what you're wanting to do, so that you can make sure that you can deliver what that client is needing. That's a lot of information that I've gone through, and I appreciate I've only stopped, was it once? So I do apologise. I say I am a talker. Do we have any questions, Lee? Or do you have any questions?
Yeah, so the floor is open to questions. If you want to come on screen, please do. If you want to unmute, of course, please do. I've got a quick one. With increasingly sort of nomadic people, if that makes sense, people moving backwards and forwards, is there a bit like with the tax laws, is there a number of days in or out of the UK that impacts on whether it would be a domestic or an international policy?
It depends upon the insurer. And once the policy is in place, in a sense, it doesn't, in some ways, it doesn't matter. So, you know, if you've put an insurance in place and someone's now going to be moving abroad, I say, unless it's income protection, life and critical illness cover, it doesn't matter. They expect people to change lives and things like that. They're not going to force people to stay in the UK if they're wanting to go move abroad and things like that. But yes, you will find that with some insurers, they will. So I usually, when I'm asking people a very initial sort of like questions for my fact find, I'll say, are you outside the UK for more than 30 days at a time for holiday or more than a week for work? Because that's when we're going to start capturing, is this person going to start having a little bit of and the insurer is going to have a bit of an extra look at this. So it can be, you know, 30 consecutive days at a time. It can be, you know, sometimes it used to be things like, you know, 90 days as a total across a year. But so each insurer is different. I say sometimes you might have it where someone's only in the UK for a month at a time and they're actually spending the majority of the year outside the UK. But because their home is here, the family's here, you know, everything is here by the fact that they're living over there just to do work. Sometimes they don't mind that. So really keep an eye on what the questions, and I always like to say it's quite a good idea. I love spreadsheets. So whenever anybody does anything, I'll probably say this in every single webinar, spreadsheets are wonderful. If you're in a team, Google Sheets is wonderful, share ideas. But, you know, especially if you start seeing a bit more of this, have a tab in a Google Sheet that says, you know, international sides of things, and, you know, just, you know, put in there, well, legal in general need you to be in the UK at this point and this point, or, and some of them, so say like with AIG, with their international policy, you don't have to be on UK soil to be able to start the policy. Whereas with other insurers, you would need to potentially be on UK soil. Now that might be in the UK itself, or it might be that you're in an embassy abroad, and that's also classed as UK soil as well. So it can be, there's lots and lots of different ways to look at it, but I say massive fan of G Sheets, start writing down these little snippets, really saves you time going forward.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So do we have any other questions? If not, I've got one more, but you can either put it in the chat, guys, or you can come on screen, entirely up to yourself. Whilst we've got Catherine and her wealth of experience.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
Nice to see you. Yeah.
Hi there. Yeah, sorry, I missed it being another call, but unintentionally, and you've probably already covered this. I've got a potential client who's currently living in Dubai. He's been there for 6 years. Don't think he's got intentions to come back at some point, but nothing concrete.
Yeah.
Where would the provider stand on that? Because he's got no fixed intentions to return.
And what cover is it that you're wanting? Is it everything, or is it?
It's probably just life and kick at this point.
Life and kick. So what I would be saying is go do the Google thing of AIG overseas tool calculator, get that spreadsheet so you'll be able to fill in the details, and it'll really, really help. The life insurance side of things shouldn't be an issue in Dubai.
Okay.
We do quite a lot with people in Dubai. So that shouldn't be an issue. It's the critical illness cover that you can have tricky parts with, because often it's a case if they're going to be out the country for 5 years or less, then they're seen as pretty much still being here in a sense. If you can, you know, if there's like a job contract that's like going to end, because obviously it's often contractual work there. So if it's like the job contract's going to end in like 2 years, and you can say, well, at the end of 2 years, he might be coming back. He doesn't know. I think it's one where that one on the critical illness side, that it'd be really chatting with an underwriter and just saying, look, we're just not sure here.
Yeah.
My instinct is if they are really, really not sure when they're going to come back, I think the critical illness cover would be in the international market that you would need to go to. But then also as well, do they have a home here in the UK at all?
That literally just chased it up with him. I think he's on the electoral roll here somewhere, but he hasn't got a mortgage in the UK, that's for sure.
Right, okay. Well, it could be worthwhile looking at Aviva and
Okay.
just look at their wording. And sometimes when you speak to them, it's sort of like it's different to what you see in like their key features documents and the terms and conditions. So I'd really go into the KFD, the T's and C's, double check their wording as to how that applies to your client. Because again, it's all to do with where they see their main residence, and if they have a residence here. If they see that their main residence is in Dubai, and that is definitely where they class home, then I do think you would probably be going to international on the critical illness side of things.
Yeah.
If not, I would think you should be able to look at Aviva, AIG on the life, and I wouldn't think that would be I think probably more AIG, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
AIG said exactly that on the kick. They said if his total stay there is 5 years, then they wouldn't offer the kick. So
Yeah.
I'll go back on the Aviva front. Perfect. Much appreciated.
It's all right. Very happy to help.
Thanks both. And Lee's just said that Aviva will cover life cover only from the information he's seen in Dubai. So he's also offering support there. So thanks. Any other questions, guys? We're sort of heading towards the end, I know, but anything else that anyone would like to ask? Okay, co-host privilege. I'll drop another one in. You've been talking about diplomats, Catherine. Does that apply also to military personnel and NGO personnel, that type of thing, or are they seen separately?
So it is seen separately. So with military personnel, it's not too bad getting life and critical illness for military personnel. It comes down to what their actual job is in whatever branch of the army they're in, and where the deployment. You know, if they're due to be deployed, that's what really comes into it. So if they are due to be deployed, that's where it's going to be tricky. If they're not going to be deployed, then that's usually, say, not too bad. Income protection is a no. So just don't even really go there in a sense. We used to be able to do you can do income protection for somebody in the forces if they're on sabbatical.
Right.
So maybe like an army medical doctor is on sabbatical to like a university in the UK to do like a year's thingy with them. You can maybe do income protection in that kind of regard, but you can't really get income protection when they're in, definitely in the army employ. But yeah, it can be tricky, but I say it usually comes down to what it is. So again, somebody in the RAF, somebody who's doing helicopter flying, that's going to be trickier for critical illness cover because they're probably going to put on an occupational exclusion on critical illness cover, which I always feel it's really interesting that because I always my thing with the insurers is saying if the helicopter goes down, it's not critical illness that's going to be claimed on. So it really confuses me why we have that as an exclusion. I don't want to make life insurance worse for people, obviously, in that situation, but it is just that kind of logic thing of, but that's not what's going to happen in a sense. But it is because of the fact that there are certain, obviously, critical illnesses that would be much, much more likely to happen if you were in a helicopter accident. But it's probably much more likely going to be a death claim, unfortunately. So whenever you do speak to somebody in the military, find out what their actual role is, what their duties are, when the deployment's going to be. And then you can go from there. Obviously, where they're going to be deployed is always a big thing as well, just to keep an eye on that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So we've got about a minute to go. Probably time for one final question if there is one. Nope. Everyone's still digesting what you said, Catherine. So just as a reminder, before Catherine says cheerio, this is the first of 12 sessions. They're all going to be recorded. They're all going to be available on Catherine's usual channels, plus an OctoMembers group. It's great to see everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to turn up. And I'll just hand back over to Catherine for her close.
Thank you very much for coming, everybody. I really hope it's been useful. Please do give feedback to me, to contact me, and just to let me know how you found it. Did you find the content useful? Was it what you were expecting? Was it not, kind of thing? Remember, in the chat, the very, very first comment in the chat was the link to the CPD form to be able to get your CPD for this. So fingers crossed, I'll see you in the future. It's like the ones that we're doing. Next one is IHT and gift planning. There's going to be 2 in March. It's usually one a month, but there will be 2 in March just because of the way that the weeks and the days fall. And also, I'll be honest, I didn't want to do one in the middle of August. I want to enjoy the summer, and I'm sure you do too. So it'll be IHT and gift planning next. And then the one after that is going to be about women's health and protection. And we'll do a men's health one towards the end of the year as well. So thank you for being here, everybody. And hope to see you again. Bye, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks. Bye.